Rachel, and I feel like a slacker. I really was hoping to make a video during my usual time, at least my usual time for these past few months when I make a video Thursday night, which isn't the AM reading videos that I make every week. My last video I made was an AM reading video, and this one is an AM reading video. Anyway, I was hoping the video I could have made earlier this week would be a review of the 3 Sammy Rohr titles that I wanted to read this month, but unfortunately I did not complete all the books in time. I have completed all of them now, and I'm hoping to script and make a video later this week. I have a whole bunch of videos, it seems, that I want to squeeze in before the month is out, so we'll see how things go, but you might be seeing a little bit more of me on the internet in this last week of March. But anyway, this is my AM reading video for March 19th through 25th, 2018, and I have gone a bit off schedule from what I laid out in my last AM reading video. To start with, I had a snow day on Wednesday where I was unable to go into work because work was closed, and I thought I would take the day to read this book. This is The Houses of Study, A Jewish Woman Among Books by Ilana and Blumberg. It is the third, technically, book that I've been talking about that's part of my Sammy Rohr project of this month, where I read 3 books that were nominated for the 2008 prize. The Sammy Rohr Prize is given annually to either an emerging writer in fiction or an emerging writer in nonfiction, and 2008 was a nonfiction year. And this is a memoir, a short memoir, under 200 pages, so hence why I figured I could make a snow day read out of it. I figure I'll start by reading from the flap. To learn was to live, and to learn well was to live well. This was the lesson of both cultures of the modern Orthodox Jewish world in which Ilana Blumberg was educated, with its commitment to traditional Jewish practice and ideas alongside an appreciation for modern secular wisdom. But when the paths of Jewish tradition and secular wisdom inevitably diverge, applying this lesson can become extraordinarily tricky, especially for a woman. Blumberg's memoir of negotiating these two worlds is the story of how a Jewish woman's life was shaped by a passion for learning. It is also a rare look into the life of modern orthodoxy, the 20th century movement of Judaism that tries to reconcile modernity with tradition. Blumberg traces her own path from a childhood immersed in Hebrew and classical Judaic texts, as well as Anglo-American novels and biographies, to a womanhood where the two literatures suddenly represent mutually exclusive possibilities for life. Set in houses of study, from a Jewish grammar school and high school to a Jerusalem yeshiva for women to a secular American university, her memoir asks in an intimate and poignant manner, what happens when the traditional Jewish ideal of learning asserts itself in a body that is female, a body directed by that same tradition towards a life of modesty, early marriage, and motherhood? I feel like I stumbled a bit through that blurb, and that kind of says a bit about the writing style of this novel. I found it very esoteric and ungrounded to a degree. When it comes to a memoir, Blumberg does indeed center around these different houses of study, but it's not in a linear fashion, really. She jumps around a bit and ruminates on all sorts of things, especially in her first section, which I believe she wrote as a young woman during her time in a yeshiva in Jerusalem, which is something that the modern Orthodox tend to do, like in a gap year between high school and college. And anyway, that was when she was ruminating on her place as a woman and on a woman's religious education and how it fits into the wider world, because that indeed is, I think, the main conflict of the novel, because women in Judaism aren't really intended to be the scholars. They're not intended to really grapple with the texts in a lifelong fashion the way that men are, but like men, women are often drawn to these stories and to these commentaries because they are supposed to shape Jewish life. And yeah, an interesting thing that Blumberg comes to at the end of this memoir is how many modern Orthodox women, including herself, turned to the academia and got advanced degrees and became professors. Like, she was an assistant professor of humanities, culture, and writing at James Madison College at Michigan State University. I had to read from the flap. In fact, I did a little more research on her, and she now teaches at a university in Bar Ilan in Tel Aviv. And so, you know, times have changed in 10 years. But anyway, it's still the sort of the same deal, where she went into secular literature and was able to become a professor because she wasn't allowed to be ordained as a rabbi. And this ties into the idea that I believe to be true about the similarity between how Jews study the Torah and other books of the Bible and the Gemara, the Talmud, the Midrash, Midrashim, and the way that English literature is studied in academics. It's a little bit different because Blumberg goes into that herself when she goes to her university house of study where she learns about Victorian novelists, and that becomes like her main area of study. And I think she was a bit stunned at how these classics were treated because, you know, there's no authoritative voice, really. I mean, no author is the word of God, as it were. So they argue and tackle texts a little bit differently than the texts are tackled within Jewish study sessions. It brought a new meaning to her life. And so too do these study sessions that she finds and creates in Judaism, because that's where most of the houses of study come from, because she had a religious upbringing, so she went to Jewish day schools in the conservative or modern Orthodox movement through high school. And then in college, she attempted to start a Beit Midrash, which is the Hebrew term for house of study, with a bunch of Jewish modern Orthodox girls who weren't satisfied with giving up, you know, the study of these texts just because, you know, they were women of a certain age. And another part of this memoir goes into sort of the changing mores of modern Orthodoxy, and she was I think in the 70s or 80s in college, and but college has changed for the modern Orthodox since then, and they've allowed more space for women. And finally, I guess I'll end with an allusion that I guess came up relatively early in this memoir, where she kind of compares what she's attempting to do, especially in the Beit Midrash of her college, to, you know, Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, because it's about women wanting to assert themselves and their minds and their ability to study and expand and connect to their heritage. But it's not exactly the same because, you know, for Virginia Woolf and wanting for a woman to have the ability to write and to write well, a room of your own is all that you need, and it can be solitary, but within Jewish practice, there is no such thing as solitary study. Everything is done in group study. So you do need leeway from other people and from the men. So it's a metaphor. It's an interesting one. It only goes so far, and I was glad that I got it early, because this book could make me feel relatively small. Because I'm drawn to it. I'm so drawn to the idea of studying these Jewish texts, and I was an English major. I was drawn to the idea of studying literature, but I didn't have that upbringing as a child. I wasn't, my education wasn't that thorough, and even as an English major, you know, there's that type of English major who remembers all of the specific quotes and details, and I feel like I never got that. I always feel like a fraud. I don't know. But, so I had a lot of personal feelings about this book and how I actually once, there's a Beit Midrash that meets in the DC area, and I joined it once, but I didn't have as much background in all of the stories of the Bible. I wasn't as familiar with them, so I couldn't keep up as easily. And I don't know, though, you know, my synagogue does create opportunities for those of us who might be less well-versed to have the chance for Bible study at least every week for the Torah portions. But anyway, was good, and I mean, I did think the writing could be really beautiful. There were some great passages in here about the power of books and literature. She talked about her grandfather's books. He was a scholar of modern Hebrew when that language was being revived. But overall, I think I found it to be a little too ungrounded, and I mean, I wouldn't want every memoir to be exactly the same, I suppose. Not everything has to be completely straightforward and logical, but I kind of wish this had a little bit more of an anchor. This next book I just finished, even though I was supposed to finish it earlier this week. This is The Man in the White Sharkskin Suit, My Family's Exodus from Old Cairo into the New World by Lucette Lagnado. It is another one of the Sammy Rohr 2008 memoirs, and it is the winner of that prize for that year. And this is certainly a more straightforward memoir about Lagnado's family, and which culminates in their exodus from Cairo and becoming refugees and citizens in Paris, and, well, refugees in Paris and then ultimately citizens in America. They were a Egyptian Jewish family, and particularly after the revolution of 1952, Jewish families were very much encouraged to leave, and you know, it was once a thriving, bustling community, and as of today, there's probably no more than 20 Jews left in Egypt at all. Most of them are now in Israel. And anyway, Lagnado starts by narrating some of the lives of her parents and her grandparents before she was born. Most of it has to do with her own life, growing up for the first 6 years in Cairo, in this cosmopolitan city, although I guess by the time she was born it was relatively less cosmopolitan with the new regime. And but that was the world that her parents knew, especially her father, who was the man in the white sharkskin suit. He was known for being very dapper and very patriarchal, and also sort of a ladies' man, and someone who did his business on the boulevards and did a lot of interacting with the cosmopolitan audience of that used to live in Cairo. A lot of the French and the British, he and a lot of Jews had really good relationships with them, whereas the Muslim Arabs not so much. But anyway, when they are forced to flee and they have to sign paperwork saying they'll never return to Cairo, to Egypt again, they are forced to leave all of their fortune behind. They are pretty much destitute. You know, they're trying to assimilate to a degree in a very different world, one that's a lot less patriarchal, for one thing, and a lot and religion is practiced a lot differently. In Cairo, her father was relatively religious, but he could also be sort of a man about town and be religious, whereas in America, especially in the Jewish community, you're kind of either very religious or very secular in a way. So it's a tale of culture shock. It's a tale of history and of change, and Lagnado is actually a reporter for the Wall Street Journal, but I found this memoir to be very flowery in some places, and it reminded me about how many people go into journalism hoping someday to be creative writers. I mean, I'm speaking as someone who went to journalism school. I know, at least that's what I found from people around me, including myself. I do, you know, sometimes wonder at some of her observations about how objective they can be, and maybe you can't be objective at all. Like some of the things she dismisses about her sister's rebellious nature. I feel like I wonder if she's letting her own opinions about that sort of color how dismissive she is of her sister's personal resentments against her family and her desires for herself. But anyway, you know, that's her right. This is her family, her life. And there's interesting things in here as well about, of course, the nature of American society, and, you know, how we can be a little privacy obsessed, or how we're not as open and friendly, and you know, she has, you know, specific examples of what her family's dealing with. And even with colonialism, I feel like it's an interesting take on, not so much on the idea of going in and invading countries, but in the cultures that are left behind, in this cosmopolitan culture, and these people who were ultimately forced from their homes, including the Jews who had lived in Egypt for a long time, or had lived in other countries in the Arab world for a long time. In fact, Lagnado's father was a Syrian Jew. His family was forced to flee Syria when he was an infant due to anti-Jewish violence, and they had a long history of being rabbis and so forth in that area. But I really liked this. I just feel like it was very rich and textured on so many levels, on a level about family and how children break away or don't break away, and about how America can assimilate people and test people who are from other cultures, and it's about history, about this lush cosmopolitan history of Cairo and what ultimately became of that. It's about how Judaism is practiced in a Sephardi culture, which is especially nice because that's relatively less well known in America, where most of us are Ashkenazi. I just feel like it was beautifully written. It had a lot of intriguing things to think about. I mean, it was a subjective memoir, and you know, that's fair. You know, she's her own person. I think, you know, maybe not everything has to be completely objective, but it feels like this is a very lived experience, and very complex, with living, breathing, real characters within it. Perhaps in a big way I like it because it read like a novel, I got to admit. I love novels, and I feel like there was a lot of complexity and emotion and interesting things to grapple on in this memoir. And again, I hope to have a more scripted review of these two books, and also The Price of Whiteness up later this week. So now I just started Girls Burn Brighter by Shobha Rao, even though I was hoping to start it earlier in the week, like I said in my last video, yada yada. This was one of my anticipated novels of the year, and I put it on the library holds list, and now I gotta read it before I have to bring it back to the library. There's probably bunches of people behind me on the hold list, I would think. I read Shobha Rao's short story collection last year, and I thought it was really beautiful, and so it made me rather hopeful for what she might do with this novel, although I've heard warnings about how brutal this novel will ultimately be, which follows two girls out of India into human trafficking situations, and they end up in America at the end of the novel, I believe. Although I'm so far not very far into it, so I can't really form an opinion yet, but I will report back and let you know. And finally, another one of my ongoing reading projects is that I'm trying to read a bunch of dystopian novels that I picked up last September as part of the DC Public Library's celebration of Banned Books Week. It took place for a month, where they had this big scavenger hunt and hid several copies of 6 different books throughout the city. They all have a dystopian theme, and starting at the beginning of the year, I've been trying to read one a month, and the order that I found them, because why not? And so for March, that book would be Who Fears Death by Nnedi Okorafor. I found it in a local grocery store on a counter. What do you know? It is a very long book, and I'll whine for a second about how much I hate mass market paperbacks, because like it's already like, I don't know, chemistry from the air or something is like forcing the pages apart. I've barely even touched it since September. I don't know. But I'm kind of excited for the length of the book, because I tried reading Okorafor's novella Binti, but I have trouble with speculative fiction reading shorter pieces. I feel like I need more space for the world building to grow, and this will certainly give me enough space. This is a book that is dystopian like the others. This is the first one, though, that I'll read that takes place. This is the first book, though, that I'll read that takes place in Africa, and it also has some supernatural elements to it, unlike the last 2 books, I believe. So that'll be interesting as well, and will hopefully keep the pages turning for me. Because I would love to finish this before the end of the month. Of course, I'm also reading Girls Burn Brighter as well, and I got some videos I want to make and some other things I want to do, and I'm working and blah 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 blah. But we'll see how this goes. Gotta keep reading. I guess that's all I can do. And that's about it for me now. I'm not sure how much more I can say, except to say again, look for me later this week. I'm hoping to do my my scripted reviews of the Sammy Rohr nonfiction books, and I'm hoping to do a book haul, and I also have to do a writing wrap up, my quarterly writing wrap up for the first quarter of 2018, which also means I might be doing some last minute writing goal stuff because. Yeah, that's a smart way to do it, leave things to the last minute. Boy, I'm overall happy with what I'm doing with my writing life in general, but we'll have to see how that stacks up to what I laid out for myself in the last quarter. But that'll probably be my last video of the month, you know, just to be fair to myself and give myself the full quarter. So anyway, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.